We can now talk to Richard Becker, a geopolitical analyst from Anti-War Answer Coalition. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, if you could just shed a little bit of light on something that's recently taken place. The U.S. Secretary of State and Senator John McCain both have slammed Ukraine. Then an American diplomat mingled with the protesters. You know, what does this say? What is behind such intense interest?
Well, thank you. It's clear that what the United States government is after is regime change in the Ukraine. And this is part of their ongoing campaign to further break up the former Soviet Union. And, you know, we really have to ask the question, how is it that the United States government determines that some acts of government suppression somewhere in the world are quote unquote disgusting, and yet stand silent when the people rise up in Bahrain, or the people who are so suppressed in Saudi Arabia are even further suppressed and repressed. This is completely based on what Washington views as Washington's geopolitical interest, its interest of global domination. And it has nothing to do with what they say they're concerned about, that is, you know, human rights and democracy. And, you know, again, we see the United States wheeling out the threat of sanctions. And we have to ask the question from here in the United States, why are there no sanctions against the United States for what it did to Iraq, or what it's done in Afghanistan, or what it's done in Vietnam, or in so many other countries around the world? Why does the United States have the authority in the world to declare sanctions against any government given its own track record?
Well, Washington is also now accusing or considering sanctions against Kiev, even though it's apparently acknowledged that President Yanukovych was elected democratically. But doesn't this show the same pattern the U.S. has used before, such as in its dealings with Libya and even in Syria?
Yeah, these forms of intervention around the world, while trying to don the cape of you know, the defender of human rights, as it was mentioned earlier in your lead-in, you know, we saw here in the United States the repression of the Occupy movement in dozens, if not hundreds, of cities, carried out in an organized way, in a coordinated way, directed by the federal government against people who were peacefully protesting here. And now we hear these kind of statements coming when in the Ukraine it's clear that the leaders of the opposition are trying to overthrow the government. They're not just engaging in peaceful protest, they are engaged in a process which they hope will bring about regime change, and in that campaign they have the full backing of the US and NATO.
Well, how, in your opinion, how would Washington react if Kremlin officials were seen mingling with anti-Obama protesters in front of the White House in a similar sort of a situation?
Well, I think to ask the question is almost to answer it. There would be a hysteria in the media if that were to be the case, if there was the intervention by those who are employed by any government which the United States views as hostile, or even if they were from governments that the United States views as friendly. That would be regarded as utterly unacceptable interference in the internal affairs of the United States by the government leaders, and yet they have no compunction about doing this now in Ukraine and in many, many other cases around the world.
Well, in your opinion, do you think Washington is ignoring the eastern half of the country who actually want something different to those in the West? This is a country that's divided by geography. You know, in the East, a recent poll says 60% want to join the Russia's customs union.
Yes, and I think that this is something that now is almost a blank in the U.S. media, in the corporate media in the United States, is that reality is left out of the equation, left out of the presentation to the public in the United States, because what is going on is an attempt to garner support from the public for a more interventionist, a more aggressive policy against Ukraine and against Russia, as is being carried out against a number of other countries in the world.
All right, Richard Becker, thank you very much.